At the time of filming, there's currently 41 playable survivors in DBD. Of those, 25 of them are original characters created by Behavior. In a series of polls on my community tab, I asked you to tell me who is your favorite original survivor in the game, for any reason. It could be perks, it could be background lore, it could be cosmetics, anything. So a big thank you to everyone who voted and commented on the polls. This is what you said. And of course, I'll give my favorites along the way as well. Like, comment, and subscribe for the algorithm. Let's go. All right, starting off with round one, we pitted Dwight, Meg, Claudette, and Jake against each other. Now, there was a lot of nostalgia in relation to this particular poll. A lot of people commented with support and love for the character that they started the game with. There were a lot of comments in support of Jake for his story, his perks, his cosmetics, pretty much everything about him. Overall, it seemed that people mostly chose the survivor that they resonated with most on a personal level, which, to be honest, is probably true of Survivor in general. Ultimately, Dwight won with 39% of the vote, a lot of people commenting about his perks and his overall goofy nature. While I don't play a lot of Survivor, if I do, there's a good chance that I'm running as Dwight. He's also the survivor I started the game with, so Dwight would be my pick as well. Next up, we had Nia, David, Feng Min, and Ace. Feng Min narrowly wins this one with 34% of the vote. Despite this, there was a lot of support for Ace in the comments. People loved his goofy and cheerful nature, both in terms of the character design, but also in the way that a lot of Ace mains seem to play him. But I'm not at all surprised that Feng Min won, because I feel like there's one of her in just about every single trial that I ever play. For my pick, I'd have to go with those of you who expressed your love for Ace. Now, true confession, I used to not really like Ace, but over time, the charm and goofiness of Ace mains won me over. However, the community has voted and Feng Min moves on to round two. Next up, we have Kate, Adam, Jeff, and Jane. Unsurprisingly, Kate takes this one with a commanding 51% of the vote. However, there was also a lot of support for Jeff in the comments. Largely, this was because of his story and lore, and just because he's an all-around good dude. There was strong love in the comments for Adam too, but it did seem that musicians especially resonate with Kate. And let's just say a lot of people admitted they like her because they think she's hot. Being a musician myself, I'm partial to Kate out of this crew, so I'll agree with the community on this one. Next up, we have Yui, Zarina, Felix, and Elodie. Yui wins this matchup with a decisive 58% of the vote. Lots of people admired her toughness as a character. Some people expressed surprise that Zarina wasn't higher, though I myself am not so surprised about that because I feel like it's very rare that I see her. Now, I have personal affection for all of these characters. I've done a lore video on Felix and Elodie, and I especially love that they are part of the pariahs and their connection to the deeper lore of the entity. But Yui is my absolute favorite. She's awesome, and she deserves to move on, in my humble but correct opinion. Next up, we have Yoonjin, Michaela, and Jonah. Michaela wins it with 59% of the vote, which I think is the highest so far, but granted, she's only up against two other contenders. Those who chose Yoonjin specifically mentioned her cosmetics and toughness. She does have a really interesting story, especially the end, where she embraces the darkness within and vows to get revenge on the trickster for what he's done. I wasn't surprised that Jonah didn't get too many votes. Honestly, he didn't seem to be disliked so much as people just felt he kind of got forgotten. No comments explain why Michaela won though, so I'm left to guess about it. I know that she was a very popular character upon release, and her perks, especially Circle of Healing, were very strong. Some might say too strong. Most will say too strong, I think. But she's also my pick out of these choices, mostly because of her lore. I really enjoy her story, and in fact, she was the first one that I did a lore video on, and so it was kind of special for me, and I had a ton of fun with it. So I have some great affection for her character, and I'm glad to see her move on. Next up, we have Hattie, Vittorio, and Thalita. Now, on the whole, there was a lot of support in the comments for all three of these characters, which I love to see. But ultimately, Vittorio wins because of his lore, and quite honestly, a lot of people find him attractive. Vittorio's lore is great, and I think he's a fascinating character, but my personal pick out of these three is going to be Hattie. I love her story even more. I think the idea of having overlaps between realms and her being able to see those is really cool. There's also very different versions of Hattie that exist across the realms, including a legend version of her that fights against vampiric monsters. To me, she's significantly underrated, so I'm happy to see plenty of love for her here. That said, I appreciate the community's love and feelings about Vittorio, and so he moves on to round two. Next up, we have Renato, Gabriel, and Sable, our newest survivor. Now, Sable absolutely destroys this poll with 68% of the vote. Lots of support for Gabriel because of his lore and personality, but Sable ultimately wins. Not a whole lot of explanation in the comments for this one. Some of it may be because she's so new. That said, she would be my pick for this one as well, mostly because her lore extends Michaela's lore from another perspective. I actually care more about how it adds onto Michaela's lore than even her own lore. I've said it before though, that I am a sucker for that kind of crossover stuff in their stories. By itself, it's just okay, but I enjoy it that much more because it intersects with Michaela's. All right, on to round 2. We now have Dwight versus Fungmen versus Kate. Loads of love for Dwight in the comments. And I'll be honest, I'm a little surprised he came so close to winning. I really thought it would be more of a competition between Fungmen and Kate. And ironically, there was no explanation in the comments this time for why Kate over Dwight. So let's infer the same reasons as before. The community thinks she's attractive. Now, before we finish off round 2, I wanted to take a moment to thank our channel members for their support of the channel. On top of supporting the channel, our members gain access to some unique channel perks, like access to the Brown Pants Archives, a series of non-DBD horror video game playthroughs by yours truly. On top of that, there's other perks like channel badges, a members-only Discord channel, behind-the-scenes content, and more. If you're interested in knowing more about becoming a member, click that join button below. Closing out round 2, we had Yui, Michaela, Vittorio, and Sable. Sable wins this one, but this time with a much closer margin. Yui's lore, cosmetics, and character design were all mentioned again in the comments in support of her. This one was all over the place, honestly. Commentators were torn. Lots of love for all the characters. That's one thing I loved about running these polls, is that there really seemed to be a lot of positivity across the board. Even for the characters who didn't get a lot of votes. Comments seemed to be really in support of characters, rather than aimed against any of them. I do wonder if Sable won this one primarily out of the shiny new thing bias. That's not to say that she shouldn't be popular, but as close as it was, I do wonder that if we ran this poll again down the road, if Yui would end up winning. You know my pick is going to be Yui. She's easily one of my top 3 favorite survivors. But the community has spoken and Sable ekes out the win to move on to the final round. All right, now for our final round, we have Kate versus Sable. After only barely beating Yui, Sable now wins it all to become the community's favorite. Even though she's new and that no doubt helped her popularity, many people pointed out in the comments that a lot of the more recent survivors haven't been this popular. So it's not just that she's new. So while I do agree that it's a factor, it doesn't explain it all. There was a lot of accusations in the comments that she just won because people think she's hot. But I think there's something about Sable that a lot of people resonate with. There's an edginess to her that many seem to like. Michaela sorta had that, but she was really deep down a sweetheart. Sable's much more daring and confident, so I'm honestly not at all surprised that she won the whole thing. So that's a summary of how you, the community, voted, but before you go, of course, I'm gonna give you my personal top 3 as well. Starting off with my third favorite is gonna be Kate. I love that she's a musician, and as a musician myself, I can relate with that. In her lore, she escaped the entity once, which I think is pretty cool. She comes across to me as tough, but also kind and gentle, which I like. As far as her perks, I've always loved Dance With Me. That said, as a killer main, Boil Over is the bane of my DBD existence, but I won't hold that against her. For my number 2 pick, it's gonna be Yui. I love her lore. She's been through a lot, but she's come out on the other side tough, strong, and brave. For example, I love her trailer when she first enters the fog and then comes across the Oni. She just stands her ground. She looks a little worried, but more determined than anything. Lucky Break is one of my favorite perks in the game, and there's a really cool lore detail with almost all of her cosmetics where her grandfather's headband is included in some way. I just think it's a neat way to connect her lore directly into the game. For my number 1 pick, it's got to be Dwight. Now, a lot of people say we look alike. I don't really see it. I mean, this is what Dwight looks like. See what I mean? No resemblance at all. But Dwight's one of the OG faces of DBD. And he really is my first survivor main, so there's some nostalgia there for me. His perks are great for new survivors or bad survivors like me, but I also resonate with him a lot. He's got leadership ability, but also struggles with self-confidence. So I'll always have affection for Dwight, and that is why he's my number 1 favorite survivor. So those are the results of the polls along with my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, can you let me know by hitting that like button? And as always, you're awesome, stay awesome, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.